Good morning, everyone. Glad to see you all back, and hope you're doing well. This class is called, anyone know the name of this class? It's up there. Lies My Culture Told Me About Christian Faith. And today we're talking about Hitler. Hitler is a fun topic. Right? A fantastically interesting topic, maybe not fun. But one thing, one myth, one lie, one statement that I hear a lot from students, from undergraduate students, from people in culture, is the idea that Hitler was a Christian, that the Nazis were essentially Christian, and this serves as a major stumbling block to the Christian faith. When you're talking to someone who may otherwise be sympathetic to hearing what you might have to say, and they've seen The View on ABC. They said, yeah, but I just watched The View. I saw Whoopi Goldberg talking about horrible people in the world and how there's lots of horrible Christians. There's a lot of horrifying, right? There have been a lot of horrifying. There have been a lot of monster Christians. Hitler was a Christian. Right? So statements like that just thrown out there without much context, except they're talking about the Christian religion. And, in this conversation, someone wants to have some general sympathy for the Christian religion, and Whoopi Goldberg's response is, no, there's a lot of horrifying Christians. Hitler was a Christian. And no comeback, no response, silence. How do you respond to that? Right? Or, if we get more serious, we can look at richarddawkins.net, which has similar statements without as much comedy as Whoopi Goldberg. But same statement, Hitler was a Christian. Hitler and his Christian Nazi party, so the Nazi party is Christian, were acting in complete accordance with traditional Christianity. Perhaps you didn't know that, but there it is. Enjoy your day. Carl Sagan, we talked about him. I couldn't find a quote in David Mills talking about Hitler as a Christian, so I'm not going to pick on David Mills today at the Atheist Universe. So David Mills, if you're watching, you get a break for today. And but Carl Sagan likes to say Christians are responsible for the Holocaust. The church, Protestants and Catholics, he points out, and the Pope were complicit with Nazi Germany and did not resist the destruction of Nazi Jews. He compares it to the Inquisition, which we talked about, and says, why wasn't there one of these great Christian saints who stood up to do anything, just like the Inquisition? No one raised a cry. All these innocent people, millions being tortured to death. Right? And we talked about the Inquisition and what is the problem with that statement. Or we find whole books that are making a point, and it's a bit more complex than a throwaway statement. Constantine's Sword by a popular author by the name of James Carroll. James Carroll is a playwright and a poet and a journalist, right? Not a professional historian. Whenever you're reading a history book, it's not written by a professional historian. Be careful. But he makes a point that the Christian gospel is the basis for unrelenting Christian anti-Semitism, and says things like this. Auschwitz is the climax of the story that begins at Golgotha. Auschwitz, when seen in the links of causality, reveals that the hatred of Jews has been no incidental anomaly, but a central action of Christian history. Because the hatred of Jews had been made holy, it became lethal. And we can think about this statement, we can say, okay, well, this is a pretty damning statement. Is anti-Semitism at the heart of Christianity? Is Auschwitz the logical, historical, cultural outtake of the Christian gospel, as Carroll says? Or books that focus on the Pope, Hitler's Pope, another very popular book, written by a non-historian, right? Talking about a secret history, made it to number 14 New York Times bestseller, and covered on 60 Minutes in a very favorable light. Very popular book. What does it say? Well, Pope Pius XII negotiated a deal that helped the Nazis take over Germany, thus condemning Europe's Jews to death camps. So not only were the Christians pro-Nazi, they actually helped the Nazis take over Germany. Right? And This photograph is said to be Pope Pius XII visiting Nazi headquarters. And we might say, wow, goodness, why haven't we ever heard about this history? Maybe you have, maybe you read the book. But it's a secret history. We'll get back to the secret part in a moment. Highly praised by Gary Wills, Karen Armstrong, and many others. These books are very popular. These books are very prevalent. These books are out there. If you know Gary Wills, I know some folks in this church, like Gary Wills or Karen Armstrong. Perhaps you've read her stuff. So you say, okay, well, what do we do with this? This is setting up the question, is Hitler a Christian? Are Nazis Christian? What's going on? Right. What about books like this? So we can start with, are these claims true? And if you look at these two particular books, and, it's tempting for me, we don't have enough time, but it's tempting for me to go through a number of reviews, technical reviews of professional historians about these questions. And if you want to do that, I can send you these reviews, but we can look at a couple statements from them. One review by University of Virginia professor of history, Robert Louis Wilkin, reviews Carroll's book and says, although Carroll's subtitle claims his book is a work of history, it's nothing of the sort. This isn't history. Right? Professional historian says popular playwright is not writing history. So we should take it with a grain of salt. If you're reading Constantine's Sword or the book about Pius XII, maybe see it as much as fiction as history. Right? If it's not history, what is it? Cornwell's claims, this is talking about Hitler's Pope, to having examined secret and incriminating documents in the Vatican Library are fraudulent. Hey, I found some secret documents that only I'd ever... No, they burned them after I looked at them. Oh, well, I wrote this book about. But there's no evidence. There's no proof. It's a secret history, a secret known only to me. Right. About how the Pope and Hitler, and I have a photograph to prove it. Look at the photograph. Isn't that something? What does this photograph actually show? Not Hitler's headquarters. Historians point out this is actually the Pope visiting the Weimar Republic at a reception in 1927. Right? Pius XII never met Hitler. There's no evidence he even met Hitler. And this is well before the rise of Nazis to power. No evidence for any secret meetings. So the whole premise of this book, this best-selling, New York Times best-selling book, Spotlight on 60 Minutes, is false. The whole premise is false. Right? That's just the tip of the iceberg. So we can ask some questions. What was Hitler's religion? What was Hitler's relationship to the church? What was the role of Pope? What was the role of other Christians in Nazi Germany? Were they complicit in the destruction of Europe's Jews? Did they actually do nothing, like Carl Sagan says? And these are some of the questions we'll talk about. We can start with Germany before Hitler. There's a long discussion of the church in Nazi Germany. How could an entire nation of Christians allow Nazis to happen? And it's not quite that simple. Germany was not an entire nation of Christians at the time of Hitler. We can go back to the Roaring '20s, the Weimar Republic, which is post-World War I Germany, and has been described as a utopia of liberal urban values and high life. Some people would compare it to San Francisco in the 1920s, but even more liberal than current San Francisco in terms of its values, its culture. Here's from this book, Gay Berlin, talks about a vibrant urban life and relaxed social attitudes, along with the influx of American money, define the golden 20s in Germany. Right? So lots of money coming in from America, and a huge culture that is very sexually liberal. This book, which is talking about gay culture, talks about homosexual bars, nightclubs, cabarets populated by gay men and women, lesbians and transgendered persons flourished in a wild, exciting, and incomparable sexual subculture. You can see that the author here is a fan of this subculture. Right? This is a very positive value, very liberal subculture. These are male gender birth, right? All these folks here. And so these are folks meeting in clubs as transsexuals, transgendered individuals, and so on. And it's an extremely sexually liberal, sexually, socially, politically liberal environment. but not a fan of the Christian church, right? So there's some images of various things here. I have some of them blacked out because they're not, everything that's covered, there's a reason why things are covered, but this is an image from a woman's magazine, which, is a strange context. I don't want to say too much because children are present, but she's offering something to her dog, right? The guy's not wearing pants. And we can say, okay, well, this is Cosmo of the 1920s, right? These are magazines that I'm hoping no one in this room subscribes to, right? The equivalent. So we say, this is Weimar Republic. What did they think about Christianity? Were they as liberal and as free with Christian values? And what's interesting is they weren't. That what they wanted was liberation of education from ecclesiastical tutelage. What that means is church influence and separation of church and state. If you think back, if you know your German history, the German church was part of the state, and the Weimar Republic was working to remove church from state, getting rid of clerical teaching positions in lots of schools, universities, across the board. There's a movement get rid of these Christian positions at Christian universities, or not Christian, state universities, because that's how it was. And Christian ceremonies forbidden in all schools, so there were laws passed that forbid Christian ceremonies. All government subsidies to the church were ended. So imagine a situation where church and state, the church is getting a lot of financial support from the state. Weimar Republic ends these supports. Churches reduced to the status of private associations under direct state supervision. Well, that's strange. You're not getting any money, but the state is supervising them. Imagine all of a sudden the state starts supervising Berkeley Covenant Church. We're not receiving federal funding. We're going to start looking at their doctrine. We're going to start looking at what we do. And now their assets are either expropriated or taxed. And the result of this was it led to a lot of people renouncing their Christian membership. Christianity became extremely unpopular. 2.5 million Germans renounced their evangelical church membership, which was a significant number. And in the religious vacuum created by the Weimar Republic, the country, the fatherland, became the undefined religion of millions of souls, and heroism became the highest virtue. So Christianity became very unpopular, and what took place was a sort of virtue, heroic-centered paganism. Right? So well before Nazis started to come to the rise, Christianity has taken a severe hit from the Weimar Republic, and in its wake, we have this man starting to rise. Everyone knows him. He needs no introduction. And we can think about our current cultural context. What happens when you have a conservative reaction to liberal values and culture starts to tear in two? Right? We see this in our own midst. What's going on? Right? What could it lead to? What sort of people can rise to power when there's a vacuum created and people are hoping to grab onto something? Right? So, was Hitler a Christian? What was his religion? Well, I probably looked at 20 different biographies of Adolf Hitler by academic historians for this class, and all of them agreed that Hitler was not a Christian, that he was an opponent of Christianity. I'll give you some of these, quotes from these books. No evidence Hitler himself in his personal life ever expressed any individual belief in the basic tenets of the Christian church. Right? This biographer makes his case, and this is the one sentence I decided to put on a PowerPoint slide. If you want to read the rest of the thing, there it is, the reference. There's also a BBC production based on it, which I haven't seen, but the historian has credentials. And Wilson, Hitler's short biography, a more popular history, but still a historian with academic credentials, and they're both Oxford-trained historians, right? Oxford, not a bad school. Much is sometimes made of the Catholic upbringing of Hitler is something to which Hitler himself often made allusion, and he was nearly always violently hostile. Speaking of priests and their hats, the beretta, he says, the mere sight of these abortions in cassocks makes me wild. Right? He gets furious when he sees priests walking around, calls them abortions in cassocks. Catholicism, the roots of Nazism. What's the conclusion of this book? A whole book talking about Nazism in the Catholic Church. There's little doubt that Hitler was a staunch opponent. Is that a typo? Should I say proponent? No, that's not the conclusion. Opponent of Christianity throughout the duration of the Third Reich. And we can see other people who point to quotes of Hitler showing he was hostile to Christianity. Here's one Hitler quote: "I shall never come to terms with the Christian lie. Our epoch will certainly see the end of the disease of Christianity. It will last another 100 years, 200 years, perhaps." Right? So lots of quotes. We could have a whole class of quotes, anti-Christian quotes from Hitler. We could say, well, who is he trying to appease? What's his deal? If he's so pro-Christian, why is he making statements like that? Maybe he's just saying that, but secretly supporting the church. Right? Maybe he's saying that to one group, he's a politician, and maybe he's putting all his money towards the Catholic Church. Right? Is that the case? Hitler, why did Hitler not like Christianity? Well, one reason was he thought it was just way too Jewish. And we talked about the Jewish roots of Christianity in this class. And Hitler saw this too. He says, the indelibly Jewish in origin and character, and a prototype of communism. Christians are Bolsheviks. They share all things in common. Look at your New Testament. Right? They give to the poor who aren't even working. Right? That's communism. Hitler doesn't like communism. Another reason he doesn't like Christianity: violated the law of natural selection. Right? This is important for Hitler as well. That doesn't mean natural selection is wrong. Just because Hitler liked evolution, it does not mean evolution is wrong. Some people make that mistake and say, oh, look, Hitler was an evolutionist. But his idea of natural selection is different than Darwin's idea of natural selection. Actually, I would say Hitler doesn't even understand what natural selection is about. But that's for another day. Hitler said Germany could not tolerate the intervention or influence of the Pope, plus Pope is foreign power. And so lots of reasons Hitler doesn't like Christianity. But my favorite is because he likes Draper and White. The shocker bit. So Hitler completely buys into the myth that we talked about, that religion and science have always been at war. Not all religions, though. Religions can be pro-Islam. Because they're very scientific. Gets that from Draper and White. So we have these 19th century myths going into an early 20th century context. Hitler's reading these folks and saying, Christianity has always gone the way of science. I love science. Therefore, I hate Christianity. Right? And he'll say things like this: the dogma of Christianity gets worn away before the advances of science. That sounds like he could be quoting Draper and White. Religion will have to make more and more concessions. Gradually, the myths crumble. All that's left is to prove that in nature there is no frontier between the organic and the inorganic. When the understanding of the universe has become widespread, then the majority of men know that stars are not the sources of light, but worlds. Then the Christian doctrine will be convicted of absurdity. So as the advance of science happens, Christianity will diminish. And other quotes of Hitler, you see him talk about Christianity getting in the way of science. And he's reading what's popular at the time, but he's also getting the other side of the myth, right? So Islam for Hitler is very pro-science, which is also something we find in Draper and White. So he's buying completely into this, and quotes on Islam are often like this: Islam would have been much more compatible to Germany than Christianity. Why did it have to be Christianity with its meekness and flabbiness? Right? Christianity is meek and flabby. Why not Islam, which is strong? Right? Here, if you can read this little quote here: the only religion I respect is Islam. The only prophet I admire is the Prophet Muhammad. He also says, complains about the Battle of Tours being lost in the 700s. If the Muslims would have won, he says, then Germans would have become heirs to a religion that believed in spreading the faith by the sword, in subjugating all nations to that faith. Such a creed was perfectly suited to the German temperament, right? And so, if you're German, don't take this in too much. But this is Hitler's view of how he wished history would have went. More science, stronger, not flabby, not meek, not taking care of the poor. This is his view. And this doesn't mean he's right about Islam either. That's not the point of these Hitler quotes. It's just trying to get at the heart of what is Hitler's religion. So lots goes into Hitler's religion. It's a very complex subject. Lots of books have been written on it. And we're going to touch a little bit of the different strands that come into his religion. And if we were to say one thing about his religion really is Nazism. And we say, well, what is Nazism? Some have described Nazism as a pagan religion itself, with Hitler as the high priest. We see Hitler in the middle of a seance here, which is some sort of energy transfer from key people. He had mediums. He was involved in the occult, the Indiana Jones stuff. He had a search for occult objects like the Holy Grail that could give him power. So we had archaeologists go out around the world. We can find the Ark of the Covenant. He had the head of Nefertiti in his office, and he talks about her as a goddess. He says, "Never shall I be parted from my goddess," because she is an Egyptian goddess. Right? So there's lots of interesting stuff going on with Hitler. And Germany is at the core of the German people. If you can call it anything, it's a sort of neo-paganism. One of the leaders of this was a guy named Rosenberg, who we'll talk about in a second. Heinrich Himmler was also very into the occult, and Bormann. And these are people that Hitler appointed as key leaders. And part of this was the destruction of Christianity in Germany. And part of this was substituting paganism and certain strands of paganism that were popular with different Nazi leaders. Hitler liked some of them, Rosenberg liked others, and they didn't agree on everything. But we can look at Alfred Rosenberg, who was a pagan. He was a German neo-pagan, and Hitler appointed him as the Minister of Education and Culture. Right, so he was the official, in terms of Nazi education, philosophy of education and culture, he's the official person in charge under Hitler. So you think, well, that's important. Who would you put, can you imagine this guy? Can you imagine Trump appoints some neo-pagan who, was into all kinds of goddess worship and all this stuff, and as the Minister of Culture, and then it's like, okay, we're going to have this in public schools. Right, so you can imagine this context. And think about, okay, well, he's notoriously anti-Christian. Ordered that the publication of the Bible cease. Well, it doesn't sound like Hitler's a fan of Christianity. I think the Bible would be important to Christianity, right? Why would Hitler order it cease? Crucifixes, Bibles, and saints removed from the altars of Christian churches. Well, that doesn't sound very pro-Christian. Mein Kampf replaced the Bible as the most sacred book in Christian altars. Right. So lots of very practical measures. We could say, okay, well, what did the church do? The church will say, okay, cool. Mein Kampf, not as entertaining perhaps as the Old Testament or something like that. But what did the church do? We'll talk about that in a moment. But we're getting to the core of, well, what were the Nazis about? All Christian crosses to be replaced with swastikas. And that's one route, the paganism. Another route, and this was fascinating to me, was in this idea that comes from a guy named Bachhofen, and especially a guy named Louis Henry Morgan, who wrote a book in the 1800s, Ancient Society. So interestingly, Hitler was very interested in a theory of primeval nature. That was sort of a neo-pagan, goddess-worshipping movement that had to do with the Aryan people. If you know the Aryan people, Hitler's view of the Aryan people was very complex. But there were many theories about what was going on, who were the Aryans, and these come to contemporary scholarship. If you've ever read the work of Mary Daly, who's a theologian, she uses this work. And so, in this book, Ancient Society, the thesis talks about women in the promiscuous and matriarchal stages were the equal to or dominant over men and were in control of sexual relations, descent, and property. With the emergence of, and the highlighted part is the interesting part, the patriarchy of the Semites. Semitic patriarchy caused turmoil, according to this theory of the world. Right? So you have the warlike Semites coming from, these nomads coming from the deserts, which destroys civilization. And so the message here is, the Semites destroyed the urban, happy neo-pagan peoples. Right? So notice the anti-Semitism here in this theory, reducing, and this is particularly has to do with women and gender theory, so this will come up in a number of different places. So early feminist thinkers will take this on 100% and use it as a way to think about reality. But the point here is the focus on longing for these peaceful times and the role of Jews in this process. And so the first smashing of patriarchy was the smashing of the Jewish patriarchy. Right? And this was another core aspect of the spiritual roots of the Nazis. This book, Gentlemen and Amazons, Cynthia Eller is a feminist historian who writes a lot about this history of this idea of the matriarchy. And when I was reading this book, I was just fascinated to see that this notions of prehistoric goddess worship and Amazonian women. So this theory looked at the myths of Amazonian women, right? These women, these strong women. And so Hitler wanted strong women and strong men, warrior women and warrior men. So he's merging these two, right? He's trying to merge this thesis. Okay, pagans were much stronger. Pagan men and pagan women. Look at the Amazonian women. They're strong. They're fighters. What destroyed the Amazonian women? Semitic patriarchy, right? And so the notions of prehistoric goddess worship Amazonian women were embraced as an inspirational vision of what Aryan society once was and could be again. And Hitler and other Nazis wanted to smash the patriarchal religion of the Semites. So complexity, smashing the patriarchy, the Semitic patriarchy is one part of that. Rehashing the neo-pagan paganism, deep German Nordic paganism, right? Thor and the gang, right? So Wonder Woman and Thor are the focus of this culture, right? And we can say, well, what if that word actually start becoming the religious focus, right? Nazi officials denounce Catholic youth organizations as separatist and disloyal. So what is Hitler's youth ministry like, right? What's the focus? Well, teaching these neo-pagan stories, giving them a proper role, getting rid of other Christian youth organizations. So imagine the government says, okay, Michelle, you're out of work unless you become a Nazi, right? New youth ministry going on. Catholics must give up their freakish and disloyal system of youth groups, right? Because we have a new game in town, or we'll use force. And so Hitler announces the way of Rosenberg is the way for German youth. Neo-paganism, right? This is what Hitler's focusing on. So you can say, well, wait. I thought Hitler was Catholic. I thought Hitler liked the Pope. Why is he getting rid of Christian Catholic youth organizations, Bibles? How can this be? What's going on with Hitler? Isn't there the formal Reich Concordat of 1933, which so many people point to as an official agreement between the Church and Nazi Germany? Why did they make an agreement? This is very early on in Hitler's career. So you say, what's going on? It seems to be, if you read a number of academic treatments of this, many people will say that Hitler saw it as a short-term political expedient to neutralize the Catholic Party at home and legitimize the Third Reich abroad. So what do? Well, you neutralize your enemy by making an agreement with them that you're never going to keep. And before even a couple of years passed, right? Before even 1 year passed, within 2 months, after saying, "Oh, we're going to leave you alone," we're going to sign an agreement where if you break it, we can take all your stuff. But if we break it, what are you going to do, Catholics? Where's your army? Huh? Come on. What are you going to do? So Hitler signs the agreement. The Church signs the agreement, and then all Catholic organizations are temporarily disbanded. Temporarily, right? Temporarily for the unforeseeable future. So Hitler breaks it within 2 months, and what happens? Well, the Catholic Church publicly and formally rejects Rosenberg's new heathenism, protesting against the crippling structures already placed upon Catholic press and organizational activity. So the Catholic Church starts to fight back, right? And the Nazi state sees the Church's attack as an assault upon the new order and its philosophy. So the Nazis fight back. And you have this back and forth through the rest of Nazi history of the Catholics versus the Nazis. Nazi government justifies both propaganda and terroristic tactics to suppress Catholic youth and lay organizations, along with pilgrimages, retreats, and other social festivities. So what's interesting is official documents that allow for terroristic tactics, right? Undermining them, cutting their electricity, using violence, intimidation. Yeah.
The Lutheran State Church is bigger than the Catholic Church in Germany. What was his relationship like with the
Yes, we will get there. We'll get there. Yeah. Good question. Yeah. So right now we're talking just about the Catholics, but we'll get to the Protestants in a moment. Nazis attempted to remove all religious symbols such as crosses and public from public places and replace them with swastika. So this would be both Catholic and Protestant, right? So all Christian symbols. And we say, okay, Catholics resist Nazis' forced retreat. What's interesting is the largest organized protest against Nazi Germany was the Catholics. The Protestants had their protest too. So you have Protestants had the honor of attempting to assassinate Hitler, right? And working against him in other ways. But we'll look at the details of that in a second. So the first question is, what about the Catholics? Nazi euthanasia program starts mercy killings designed to rid the German economy of useless eaters, invalids, feeble-minded, people with epilepsy, terminally ill, and elderly who couldn't work. And this was a top-secret program, but Catholic officials, clergy, started noticing people were disappearing, people were taken, they get these notices that such and such had to go over. So they inquired, right? They started to notice things were weird, that patients in various places, patients in the hospitals and such being transferred without notice to relatives. And this was happening at Protestant churches too, so we start getting into the Protestants and Catholics, start talking to each other. Protestant hospitals, Catholic hospitals, homes for those who are mentally ill. People start disappearing. Protestant and Catholic clergy start getting together, start investigating, start writing letters of protest. These are a number of the folks who lost their lives because of this. Right? These are there's a cardinal in there, a German cardinal, very well-known Lutheran pastor, and I think there's 3 Catholics and 2 Protestants up there, and Nazis tell them to keep quiet or else. What do? They say, okay, we're going to start preaching on this. We're going to start going on the radio about this. We're going to raise public fury about this. And the result of this is eventually this program was suspended, right? And so this protest kept up throughout the duration of Nazi Germany into the beginning of the war, and eventually was suspended because it was thought, well, there's too much protest and we want to get wartime spirit going. And there were other things going on that were more top secret that were actually doing similar things. So, and these people all ended up in prison and dead, and all of the people were protesting too. But other people took their place. And then, 1933, we can say this is early on, when Hitler first starts getting rid of the Bible, religious symbols and stuff. What was the Protestant response? Well, the first Protestant response was the Pastors' Emergency League, which was joined by over 7,000 pastors under the leadership of a Lutheran pastor, Martin Niemöller. And there's Martin Niemöller. He rejected the Nazi. This league signed a document rejecting the Nazi demand for the purging of all Jewish practices and vocabulary from the church's liturgy. So that was one of the Aryan clause of the Nazis, what they said that churches had to do. Hitler commenced with a violent attack on Niemöller as a turbulent priest and charged the bishops with disloyalty to the state. Lots of folks ended up in various Gestapo prisons, under house arrest, and other places that, the worst offenders who wouldn't stop ended up at death camps. And we probably know the story of Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who was part of the Pastors' Emergency League, but then also Bonhoeffer was key in what was called the Confessing Church, which was a subgroup of the Pastors' Emergency League, which started to have a secret network of seminaries and training people to actively resist the Nazis. And Bonhoeffer himself was involved in an assassination attempt with Hitler, and he was a pacifist who didn't believe in violence. But he thought about it as Abraham and Isaac. Sometimes God calls you to do what's beyond standard ethics for the will of God. And he discerned this through prayer. And that in itself, Bonhoeffer himself would be an entire class. And so would Karl Barth, who also resisted Hitler and was the author of the Barmen Declaration against Hitler. And so there's a huge Protestant response as well. These were also 2 of the most prominent theologians in the German-speaking world at the time. And so these were major players. Paul Tillich, another major theologian, was fired from his post in Berlin. Eventually Tillich came to America. Tillich wanted to play a little bit safe, but he did protest against the Nazis. Not as much as Bonhoeffer, who lost his life. Barth was a Swiss theologian who was working working with others to fight against Hitler. But Martin was pretty safe in Switzerland. So what about the Pope? Pope Pius XII, even before he was Pope, started speaking out against Hitler and Hitler's racism. Starting in the 1930s and throughout the entire war, March 1935, he published an open letter calling Hitler and Nazis false prophets with the pride of Lucifer. So he essentially calls Hitler Satan pretty early on. So you think, okay, well, what's the Pope playing at? He's calling Satan he's calling Hitler Satan. Publicly, Hitler wasn't thrilled about that. But the New York Times picked up on it. Says the Pope condemns dictators, treaty violators, and racism. So we have the popular press. And we say, okay, well, people knew that the Pope was doing this. This is certainly his reputation. Again, the New York Times headline, Pope pleads for Jews, listed for removal from France. So 1942, you find the Pope is arguing, as people know by this point, that the Jews have disappeared from Germany, and the Pope is a key person arguing against the destruction of the Jews. New York Times article from December 1941, the voice of Pius XII is a lonely voice in the silence and darkness enveloping Europe this Christmas. In calling for a real new order based on liberty, justice, and love, the Pope put himself squarely against Hitlerism. So there's lots of popular press. It's fun looking through New York Times articles and headlines to see how was the Pope perceived in what he was doing in the American press. And we can look at the German press as well, and look at how Hitler responded to the Pope. And so one way that Hitler responds to the Pope is putting out propaganda against the Pope, calling him a pro-Jewish Pope, calling him a traitor, calling him all these things, right? Enemy of the German people, right? And so the Pope is not seen as a good guy in Hitler's Germany, and Hitler even tried to kidnap the Pope. Right, so there are a couple attempts at kidnapping the Pope, which failed. But you might say, well, it doesn't seem like they have a cozy relationship, right? You're trying to kidnap the Pope and call him evil, and he's calling you evil. Seems like a pretty open argument to me, right? That's not affecting any political schemes. The whole point is Hitler and the Pope are working together to further Nazi Germany. Why is the Pope having this public face which is undermining Nazi Germany? And not only is there a public face, he's telling Catholics to take care of Jews, hide them. Right? So we have Vatican correspondence. This is a fascinating book on the Vatican archives. And we say, oh, the Vatican archives, they're all fake. Right? Obviously fake. But if you trust them, we find the Pope giving commands to people to say, hide these Jews, take care of them. And what's interesting is that's what they did, right? So Hitler responds by attacking the Catholic Church, sending thousands of priests and nuns to Dachau and other death camps. So lots of Catholics were sent to the concentration death camps because they were fighting against Hitler. But what's interesting is Raoul Wallenberg Society. Raoul Wallenberg was one of the key people who saved thousands and thousands of Jews from the Holocaust. He was a Swedish guy. Wonderful story there. But he was also Christian. But the Nazis, so their society did research on where were Jews hid during World War II, and they found that when the Nazis attempted to seize and exterminate the Jews of Italy, over 85% survived, and pretty much all these were hidden in Catholic buildings. Right? They found the same thing with Germany. The biggest place Jews were hidden were places owned by Catholics in Germany, in Italy, in France. Everywhere that Hitler was trying to get rid of Jews, the Catholics were the main people who were hiding the Jews. So you might say, well, what's going on here? Right? They're kept safe till Allied troops arrived. Right? Did they not know they were Jews? These are Catholics. Right? Lots of myths here. Lots of myths. And my favorite story is the Pope himself opened his own home to shelter thousands of Jews during the war, providing them even with kosher food, and turning his private apartments into a place for pregnant women, right? A medical ward for women who are about to give birth. And so much that Israeli diplomat Pinchas Lapply testified that the Pope, Pius XII, was instrumental in saving at least 700,000, but probably as many as 860,000 Jews from certain death and Nazi death. So the Pope himself, from his efforts, right, saved lots of lives and Jewish lies. Right? Hitler did not like him for this, but there's no evidence to say that the Pope was complicit in the destruction of the Jews with Nazi Germany. Right? If you look at what the Pope actually did, and this is again a summary that really doesn't do justice to what's going on. And he was celebrated when the state of Israel was founded. People learned about the horror of the Nazi death camps. It was also found out everything that Pope Pius XII was doing to save Jewish lives during the war. The first president of Israel celebrated Pius XII, seeing him, the Holy See, as lending its powerful help wherever it can to mitigate the fate of my persecuted co-religionists. So lots of folks in the early founding of the state of Israel talking about what Pius XII was doing. And somebody might say, well, then what happens in the meantime? How do we have this image of the Pope today? How could we have had books like Hitler's Pope being taken seriously? Well, it starts in the 1960s with a sort of anti-Catholic revisionism, and there's Soviet involvement. I almost hesitate to even talk about Soviet involvement, because that's, we're always talking about Soviet, Russian involvement today. But the Soviets, they're starting to spread Marxism. Big opponents of Marxism are the Catholics. So it's part of a propaganda campaign for the spread of communism. And you have Marxists in the U.S. You have all kinds of folks who hate the Catholics. And you have lots of popular stuff being written, like plays, that The Deputy, which opened in London and then had a very successful Broadway debut, was extremely popular as a play. And this was the first promotion of this idea of Pius XII as being complicit with Hitler. Right? So it's from a play, a very popular play, which was rejected by historians. Even at that point, historians said this is worthless. But who listens to historians, after all? Who cares what professional historians say? One historian from Cambridge said that the examination of all the pertinent documents decisively established the falsehood of Hochhuth's allegations. So again, secret documents, bad translations from the German. Scholars say, no, that's not the case. But no one cares. Hollywood makes into a movie titled Amen, which was a very popular movie at its time, according to the ratings. Not quite a blockbuster, but had a good showing. And then the play was revived again in London in 2006. And so life goes on, popular books get published, they make it to the New York Times, and they're bestsellers, right? Like Hitler's Pope, Constantine Sword, Papal Sin by Gary Wills. These are very popular books that are saying the exact same things that professional historians have said is absolute rubbish. But yet we continue, right, to take in the myths, take in the lies. As I was preparing this class, we might have other things we might want to talk about. But these are a couple questions that came to my mind. One is why are we so ready to believe anti-Catholic propaganda? I'm always, I keep reading this stuff. This, for me, this class has been a process of finding the Catholics aren't nearly as bad as I once thought they were. Like someone who used to be pretty randomly anti-Catholic in my time. When I was in high school, I was not a fan of Catholics. And these were a lot of reasons why. But I mean, why am I so ready to believe these things about Catholics without even giving them the benefit of the doubt and a little bit of further research? And so maybe we can think about that in groups. Secondly, why do you think there has never been a major movie that's been produced about the true Pius XII during World War II? Something like Schindler's List. After all, he's very instrumental. He led his own home. He's used his resources to defend the Jews. So why no major movie like Schindler's List about Pius XII? Why do you think such a movie hasn't been produced? You might think of other questions you want to talk about too. But let's split up into groups. Try to keep it around 5. And let's spend a few minutes talking about these questions. And then we'll talk together.